2016's Superhot might just be one of my favorite indie games of this past generation thanks to its inventive combat, striking style, and mildly creepy meta-narrative, and Superhot VR might just be the single most entertaining VR experience I've ever had. So with the announcement and subsequent release of Superhot Mind Control Delete, I was really excited for more Superhot, and aside from a few tweaks and additions to the formula, that's exactly what this game is, more Superhot. But as it turns out, it might actually be too much Superhot. For the unfamiliar, Superhot is a shooter where time moves when you move, essentially changing the game from a traditional FPS and into something more akin to a puzzle game. You have ample time to check your surroundings for weapons and line up your shots while standing still, and the game becomes less about shooting and more about figuring out the best sequence of actions to clear a room with as little movement as possible. As with the original Superhot and Superhot VR, Superhot Mind Control Delete keeps this tense and interesting mechanic intact, but it also adds a few new things to the mix as well. The most notable of Mind Control Delete's new additions are cores and hacks. Cores are basically perks that you select when starting a new challenge sequence and include passive benefits such as extra hit points, of which you have 2 by default, or active benefits like giving you a charge move that lets you rush enemies and melee attack them from a distance. These aren't all new abilities, as the hot switch power that lets you swap bodies with your enemies was included in the original Superhot, but having a selection of perks on offer is refreshing and lets you tailor your playstyle to some degree. The hacks, on the other hand, are randomized modifiers that alter smaller aspects of each sequence at predetermined points between levels. Basically, after you clear a level or two, Superhot Mind Control Delete offers you 2 of these mods to choose between, and they include bonuses like more ammo in the guns you pick up, greater power and range on your melee weapons, or letting you start each level with a random firearm. Some of these hacks are even core specific, such as those that make a thrown katana pierce through multiple targets, or ricochet between hostiles when you recall it, which is only available if you have the recall core active. In theory, these roguelike elements should keep each sequence of levels feeling fresh and interesting, but if I'm being honest, Superhot Mind Control Delete wore thin for me really quickly. I'm one of those folks that never found the original release particularly repetitive, despite it not having any of the modifiers or perks that Mind Control Delete introduces, but Superhot Vanilla had something that this game doesn't have: unique levels with set enemy layouts. This isn't to say that Superhot Mind Control Delete is a bad game, after all it is more Superhot and Superhot is amazing, but it does feel like significantly less handcrafted content spread across a much longer playtime. The game's sequences give you 5 or 6 levels to tackle in a row, with the aforementioned hacks peppered in to keep things interesting, but the problem is that there are only a couple dozen level layouts on offer, and you'll be revisiting them from different starting spots over and over again. Mind Control Delete does filter some new stages in over time, but even with the full assortment available, there just isn't a ton of variety. And with enemy spawns being somewhat random, the puzzle element of which guys do I take out first to get the most out of my movement isn't really a thing anymore. I wouldn't say this change in design is necessarily bad, as Superhot Mind Control Delete does make alterations to accommodate its less thoughtful, more action-focused approach, such as letting you get hit more than once before you have to start over. But personally, this new roguelike progression and less strategic gameplay just don't do much for me, and the game is way longer than the original, clocking in at about 8 to 10 hours, despite feeling like it only has the content to cover maybe half of that time. By the end, Mind Control Delete feels like it's outstayed its welcome by a wide margin. New enemy types based on the cores you collect throughout the game manage to spice things up a little towards the end, but the fact of the matter is that they're introduced far too late in the game to give it the extra oomph it needs after the first hour or two, and when you really drill down on it, they're all just unkillable obstacles to avoid, albeit obstacles with different methods of messing with you. Superhot Mind Control Delete's drawn-out runtime and repetitive gameplay are genuinely disappointing to see after the polished, concise experience of the original and the VR sequel. Thankfully, it does remain stylish as hell with its striking minimalist visuals, and an eerily quiet ambience still hangs over most of the game, aside from one level that features a Doom-style metal track that distorts according to the speed of time moving around you. Unfortunately, this unique style is also kneecapped somewhat by Mind Control Delete's repetitive use of the same environments. On their own, these are great levels with plenty of personality, but after you've seen them a dozen times each, they become kind of boring. With that said, the game still replays your slow-mo action sequence in full speed once you beat a level, and there are a few things that I can think of that make you feel quite as badass as these John Wick-esque replays do. Superhot Mind Control Delete also manages to bring more of the series' creepy meta-narrative to the table, alongside its unique presentation, and honestly, it was the part of the game that had me pushing through to the end. Unfortunately, the game's plot feels a lot more abstract and a lot less rewarding to experience this time around. Judging by the game's various jabs at the player's desire for more meaning and more secrets, it definitely feels like this was intended, but it doesn't make it any less satisfying. There are still plot elements that I really like, specifically the implication that each core you collect is based on someone under the control of the Superhot program, but overall, I can't say the narrative payoff felt worth slogging through the repetitive roguelike gameplay that makes up the bulk of Superhot Mind Control Delete. To the game's credit, that roguelike gameplay does give it an innate sense of replayability since each randomized run is likely to be unique in one way or another, but as I've already said, I found that the experience wore out its welcome long before it was actually over. I can't imagine spending more time replaying its levels now that I've finally hit the credits. But your mileage may vary, and if Superhot Mind Control Delete's gameplay gets its hooks into you, the game offers endless survival modes on top of the usual randomized sequences, and there are plenty of optional hacks to go after as well. If you were one of those people that thought the original game was way too short, then this one definitely has that base covered for better or for worse. With all that said, Superhot Mind Control Delete is mediocre. I still really like a lot of what Superhot Mind Control Delete brings to the table, but if I'm being brutally honest, it just isn't enough to keep an experience that's triple the size of the original game from wearing thin really quickly. The constant repetition of levels and Mind Control Delete's pivot to a more roguelike style also makes the core Superhot experience feel less carefully arranged, and while the core gameplay is still incredibly satisfying, it does feel like a bit of the magic has been lost. If you paid for the original Superhot, then there's a good chance you can access Mind Control Delete for free, which is about the only way I feel justified in recommending it. If you find yourself having to pay for it, maybe wait until it goes on sale. Superhot Mind Control Delete is available on Xbox One, PS4, and PC.